Hi, everybody. I'm John Walcutt. I'm an actor and a director and a teacher. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Shakespeare's Henry V, and in particular, the Once More Into the Breech Difference speech, which is a very famous speech, a great actor speech, and a good audition piece, too. It's easy to contrast it with other kinds of monologues if you're looking for two contrasting pieces. Sometimes people will say, well, these Shakespeare pieces are so overdone, should I not do this speech? But I think you have to keep in mind that there are a limited number of them, and if you do them well, and if you relate to them, then do the work, dig out the meaning, interpret them, and give them your best shot. You should always do these pieces. They're great monologues. Okay, so a little bit about Henry V. Shakespeare wrote this in about 1599. He was kind of coming right to the peak of his career, and he wrote them immediately after his two Henry IV plays, Part 1 and Part 2, which were huge hits, and of course not only featured Falstaff, one of his favorite characters, but also Prince Hal, who then becomes King Henry V. And in the Henry IV plays, of course, Prince Hal is kind of a rascal and popping around, hanging at the bars and hanging with bad women and having fun. And then when the time comes, he, of course, at the end of those plays, steps up, beats Hotspur, and becomes the great hero and unifier of England. He's still looked on as a great war hero, a great historical figure in English history. And often these speeches from this play are used to sort of summon up patriotic feelings during tough times. Churchill used them during World War II, as did Laurence Olivier in his movie. So these are very popular and very patriotic kinds of speeches. Henry V is remembered as being a great war hero. He conquered France, brought France together with England during the 100 Years' War, which you can look up and do some research on. The important thing about Henry V, as you think about Henry as an actor, is that at this point in this play, he is a great warrior. And that's the important thing. Whether you're a woman or a guy playing this part, you have to embody this great leadership. And even though this is a war play, Shakespeare always sneaks in some of his own personal sensitivity about war and a sort of an anti-war vibe. And you'll even see some hints of it in this particular speech. So the Once More Into the Breech Difference speech is, I think, Act 3, Scene 1, and it takes place outside of the city of Harfleur, which is a city in Normandy, the northern part of France, right on the English Channel, sort of, I think, southeast of Southampton in England. So this is where Henry has come on shore in France in the beginning of this campaign, and he's had this city surrounded for a month, I think. And if you imagine in your mind's eye, and I always work from imagery, if you imagine in your mind's eye a classic medieval walled city, probably you think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. But yeah, a walled city, a city with a wall around it. Harfleur had 3 gates, but it was surrounded by a wall and very fortified. And when Henry brought his troops, historically, they held the city under siege for like a month or something, and Henry lost like 5,000 soldiers, mostly to dysentery, sickness, but it was very, very costly, a very costly campaign. So when you're going to take on this speech, and Shakespeare in general, the first thing, of course, is you've got to figure out the words. You've got to break the code and understand the language. It's no different than Harry Potter. You've got to figure out the language and figure out what's going on. I think for the purposes of this demonstration and this class, we've edited it a little bit. And if you're doing a Shakespeare for an audition piece, it's totally okay to edit. You can say, I've edited this piece for time purposes. It's not okay to improvise. You can't really say, to be, or maybe I should kill myself. That will probably raise a little ire from someone. But it's okay to edit things. So we've edited this speech a little bit. So as you think about this imagery, think about this idea of Henry, you, me, if we're playing this part. Henry is about 26 at this time, It's not really relevant, except that Henry's in the prime of his athleticism. He's a fighter, a warrior, and a leader. And he's actually right in the front lines with these soldiers, all kinds of soldiers. People who've been conscripted, who are from all the English lower classes, middle classes. And that's one thing to remember, that in the middle of all these people, you are the king. They're fighting next to the king. So whatever analogy works for you in that imagery, think of that. But you're the king. Think of these times, the weaponry of these times. You would be holding one of those big heavy swords and maybe a shield. There wasn't really a lot of hand-to-hand gunfire at this time because guns were too unpredictable and they would blow up in your hands. But what they did use in this campaign were cannons and cannonballs to kind of pound the outside wall of the city. And that's what's happened here. And in the opening line, when Henry says, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends," there's a breach in the wall, a crack in the wall, or a hole that's probably been blown open by cannons. And now Henry's trying to get all of his troops to follow him. One more time, they're going to try to storm this wall and go through this crack and get inside the city under heavy fire, bows and arrows, or cannons coming from the city, and of course, guys with swords and dumping hot water over the sides and all those other things that they did in those days. So if you start this speech with the idea that it's very public, it's not a private monologue like To Be or Not to Be or Macbeth's She Should Have Died Hereafter. It's not introspective. It's very public and very private. So you have to make sure you're warmed up and you're supporting your voice from underneath so you don't push from your throat. So let's look at some of the wording here. So it starts out, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead." That's pretty clear. It sounds like they've done it a few times before, probably a lot of times before, but he's saying one more time, let's do it and let's make this work or else we're all gonna die trying, right? And then he sort of shifts gears for a second. And however you play this beat as an actor is up to you. But there's a little beat shift here where a little bit of Shakespeare creeps in. And he says, "In peace, there is nothing more becomes a man than modest stillness and humility." So during peacetime, nothing is more good or attractive in a human being than modesty, quiet, and humility. Then he goes on, "But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger." And think about England in those days. I mean, a tiger would be so exotic and ferocious. So this is an image of just fury and rage and animalism. Imitate the action of the tiger. And now he goes on to describe some of that. Stiffen the sinews. What are sinews? The long rope-like muscles of your arms and legs. Stiffen the sinews. Summon up the blood. Get your blood going. Disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage. So that means cover up your nice guy-ness, cover up your kindness, cover up your humanity with hard-favored rage. Then lend the eye a terrible aspect. Set the teeth and stretch the nostrils wide. Take a deep breath. Here we go. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to its full height. So take a deep breath, muscle up. Here we go. And then he says, on, you noblest English. And imagine the effect of this. The king saying to every grubby, sick, little beaten down person who's in this army, you noblest English. And this is one of the great gifts that Shakespeare gives Henry V. Later on in the play, a couple months later historically, there's the very famous Battle of Agincourt, where Henry and his troops overcame tremendous odds and won there, losing only a couple hundred people to tens of thousands of French soldiers. And in that scene, of course, in Shakespeare's play is the wonderful St. Crispin's Day speech about we few, we happy few, will be remembered as the heroes. So he's calling on that imagery right now. On, you noblest English. And then he says, I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. Greyhounds, of course, are those really slim racing dogs that are panting and ready. I see you straining in the slips. The slips are at the beginning of the race, those gates, before they go, they're off. So he's seeing these soldiers ready to go. They're ready to go. They're ready to go. I see you now like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry God for Harry, England, and St. George. And then they're into it. They charge the wall and the fight is on. So he asks them to bend up your spirit to its full height and do it for Harry. That's him. Harry is a nickname, of course, for Henry, King Henry. England, for our country, and for St. George. And St. George, of course, is a patron saint of England. This is St. George the Dragon Slayer, who, according to history or mythology or whatever you choose to believe, was killed by the Romans for refusing to say he was not a Christian. So a great hero in all throughout the Middle East and in England too. And actually the cross of St. George, those red crosses, are the basis of the English flag. So Henry is saying, do it for me, do it for England, and do it for St. George. And then the charge is on. So that's kind of how you break this speech down. Now, as with any other good acting, you think to yourself, okay, who am I talking to? I'm talking to this mass of beaten down soldiers, right? Who am I? I'm the king. I'm the guy. I'm Michael Jordan on the free throw line with the game tied and no time left on the clock. I'm the guy. Give me the ball, right? And what do you want from these guys? You want to get them to go with you one more time, to give it everything they've got. Now, you know, that's your objective, or as we say, sometimes super objective. But you can't just yell at them, you know, to get what you want. Come on, come on. And that's the danger with this speech, that you can blast it out and it becomes one tone. So you've got to find different tactics, just like we do in life. If you want to get $20 from your father, you don't just say, give me $20, give me $20, give me $20. Yeah, you're pursuing your objective, but we're way smarter in life. We say, boy, Dad, you look really good today. Have you been working out? Or you say, Dad, could I wash the car for you? Or you say, Dad, all the other kids are going out to get a pizza and I don't have $20 because I bought Mom's birthday cake yesterday. I mean, we find all kinds of ways to get it done. So think of how you'd break down tactics in this speech too, so that you can find a way to sculpt it so that it's all just not yelling. Look for the beats in it. So interpret it the way you want. That's generally the way I would approach this. I always think when I do Shakespeare, I think in terms of imagery. What am I seeing? What am I seeing? What am I trying to make you see? So, taking on this speech, I might do it something like this if I were in my 20s. Once more into the breach, dear friends. Once more, or close the wall up with our English dead. And then I take a little beat here. In peace, there is nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage. Then lend the eye a terrible aspect, and set the teeth, stretch the nostril wide, hold hard the breath, and bend up every spirit to its full height. On! On, you noblest English! I see you stand like greyhounds in the slip, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry God for Harry, England, and St. George! And there we go. So that's one way to look at it. It's a great speech. Have fun with it, enjoy it, physicalize it, don't run away from it, be a hero. Thanks.